everybody. For anybody that doesn't know me, my name is Kara Schauble, and I bought a bus. I decided to make these videos about the process for anybody that's interested or just bored. I'll be traveling in it, which is where most of my videos are going to come from, hopefully. I had a lot more footage from the early days of demoing the bus, but my phone crashed and I lost it all. So all that's gone. But I put together all the things I have so far. So in the meantime, here's a crash course on bus renovations, mostly solo. I had a little help from friends. That's my dog. Porter, you wanna say hi? He's barking at the maintenance man that isn't even at our door. I don't know what he has against this man. So anyway, here we go. Okay, so pause. Here you see what the bus looked like when I first got it. This is right after I brought it home. You see the partitions, the little area above the driver's seat, the floor, the seats, the ceiling, the walls, the lights. Over the course of just this video, but others coming up as well, you'll see all of that change. As I was saying earlier, I lost a bunch of footage when my phone crashed, so all this I pulled from Instagram, which is why these captions and songs are on it randomly. First things first, I had to get the chairs out. There were multiple bolts on every chairs that were holding it down. They'd been there for so long that I couldn't unscrew them, so I had to cut through them using an angle grinder, which you can see in my hand here. Little did I know at the time that I had the wrong blade on it. So I was using a grinding blade and I needed to use a cutting blade. I mean, this whole thing has been such a learning process for me. So this was just the first of many mistakes I made and learned from. So I kept at it and got all these seats out. You can see I'm starting to tear up the floor. You can see the wood showing through, which I'd planned on keeping and reusing for the subfloor, which you'll find out is not what happened. Also, pay attention to that air conditioner in that back area because not necessarily in this video, but in the next one, that's all coming down. So I decided I was going to get started on the walls. I took out the partitions, I took out the seats, I took out the seat belts, which I had to cut through. Some of them I couldn't get off the floor, so that's also a later thing I had to tackle. The wall covering was compact fiberglass, so as I rip it off and it tears, it sends fiberglass just into the air. So I had to cover my head, my face, you know, pretty much any skin that you can, but it still would get in my shirt, and some of it I probably breathed in. So you really have to be careful with that stuff. I was not as careful as I should have been, and that is the lesson that we learned here. So anyway, it went from this to this. It was very, very tedious. This was probably my least favorite part of the demo process. So then I switched it up. Let's decide I was going to pay more attention to the floor now. I noticed there was this soft spot in the wood and just kind of dug away at it and found some rust. So I thought, well, now I need to get under this wood. I need to figure out how to take it up, which I thought was going to be so easy. It was not. So I took it to my friend Zach's house, who you see here, who was kind enough to help me by getting under the bus and cutting through the bottom of some bolts that were keeping the floor down. He helped me get 3 or 4 off, but even so, we couldn't get them all. So I had to change my plan. So I moved on to this idea where I took a circular saw and adjusted it so that it would cut through the wood, but not through the metal underneath, which it turns out was very thin. It took me a while, as you see here, to figure out exactly what adjustment I needed to make. But I ended up cutting out this large rectangle to work with so that I could make sure I was patching all of that rust underneath and completely covering up the hole. So the plan has changed a little bit. After cutting through the floor, I realized this is good wood, so I'm gonna keep it, just build a subfloor on top of it. This is what we have. We have this square rectangle. There was a rotted spot that I was gonna have to take out anyway, so I'm just gonna replace that part, build the subfloor. So I gotta fix some leaks. So I'm gonna go up on the roof with some caulk and fix some leaks, and then patch this with some new plywood. Well, I gotta cut out some rusted metal first, angle grind some rust off, paint some rusties on it, and then put some plywood, and then I'm gonna sand it all down with an electric sander and get started on subfloor. Stay tuned. So this is the status of the floor. I wasn't going to be able to do all of the subfloor until that hole in the back was patched, but I decided I could go ahead and get started on the front half of the bus, getting the subfloor done there. At this time, I had a plan for that hole, but that didn't end up working. I ended up needing my dad's help, so it is what it is. I knew I was going to be moving soon and wasn't going to need my bed or my box spring, so I decided I would take apart the box spring and use that wood for the subfloor. As with everything else, it took way longer and was much harder than I thought it would be, but I think it was worth it because I got my whole subfloor frame out of it. Now I could finally get started on building the subfloor frame. So here I'm measuring out the distances that I wanted them to be, and I'm marking where there were screws underneath so that I don't drill into a screw that's already there. Then of course I had to cut it down so that it would fit. You want it pretty snug. Even though I was going to be drilling these into wood underneath, you still want a snug subfloor frame. And then since I knew where they were lying, I just went ahead and drilled them down. In hindsight, I definitely should have measured the distances between, because later on it becomes an issue with the insulating, but we figured it out and it was all fine. It just would have made this easier for me. So at the end of all that, this is what I was left with. I have wood left over, but this is just where I stopped that day. So I turned my focus to the front of the bus. There was this really gross fabric that was lining the front of it, and here I've already taken it up. And thanks to my friend Gabby, who also happened to be renovating the bus, I was able to get her leftover stick-on insulation for free, and ended up looking like this. So here you can see that I've already painted some sealant on the subfloor frame. The ceiling was a very similar process to the walls because it was that compact fiberglass again, and I just really had to rip it all off. And this was the finished product. I'm jumping around a little bit. This is obviously before I did the subfloor, but this is just how it worked out to narrate best. So then I moved on to the windows. I was really into insulating every little bit of this thing that I could. So I took the borders off the windows, which just unscrewed pretty easily, and got this spray foam insulation and sprayed it into any gaps I could find. It dries and expands, and then once it's completely dried and hardened, you cut it down. This took a few days to get all the windows done because I kept having to go back to the store and get more foam, and then you have to wait for it to dry completely before you can get it down, or it'll get caught on the utility knife. And so it was just a little time consuming and very tedious, especially just because of my name as a person. But here you can see me putting one of the borders back on, so you can kind of see the finished product. What I didn't like about this was that it was kind of wasteful, just because after all that expands, then you cut it off and see you have, this is just from like a couple windows, all that you have to throw away. I love to try to reuse things and create as little waste as possible. It's necessary. I wish there was a different way to do it. If anybody has a different way to do it, it's too late for me, but please let people know. So since the demoing is done for the most part, I'm gonna go ahead and stop this video here because the next steps are me taking the bus to my parents' house, and my dad and I just spent like a week getting a whole bunch of stuff done and starting to put things in the bus instead of taking things out, which is super exciting and way more rewarding than the process up to this point. So please stay tuned. Keep an eye out for the next video, whenever that may be. And I hope you've enjoyed this. See you next time.